Tuesday evenings were always hectic, especially on the second Tuesday of every month when my Cows Club held its regular meeting at 6:30 p.m. Sophia, my wife of 4 years, and I usually got home around 5 o'clock or 5:30. Since the club meeting included dinner, I was spared from cooking that evening. However, Sophia always managed to come up with a last-minute list of tasks that she insisted I handle before I could leave. The real struggle, though, was dealing with my own emotions. According to Sophia, she was 3 months pregnant and battling intense hormonal changes. Despite this, she maintained the allure and charm that had captivated me from the beginning, now enhanced by the glowing radiance of impending motherhood. It was hard for me to pull myself away from her, even for a few hours. To me, Sophia was flawless, standing at 5 feet 3 inches and weighing just 110 pounds. Her light brown hair framed her stunning blue eyes in a way that always left me mesmerized. Her physical beauty complemented mine, but I adored her for so much more than her appearance. She had a sharp wit, a keen eye for detail, and an unparalleled sense of humor. Not that her looks hurt my admiration, of course. Still, by 6:10, I had to rush out the door to make it on time. My routine was always the same: a quick shower, pulling on some slacks and a sports shirt, planting a hasty kiss on Sophia's cheek, and heading out. I usually didn't get home until after 11 p.m., sometimes closer to midnight. Tonight seemed like it would follow the same pattern. After hurriedly getting ready, I grabbed my briefcase, made my way through the kitchen, and passed by Sophia, who was preoccupied at the sink. I kissed the back of her neck and gave her a gentle, reassuring squeeze before reluctantly leaving. The temptation to skip the meeting lingered, not just because of Sophia, but also because I had an ongoing project in the garage. I'd been installing a baby monitor system for the nursery. I estimated it would take another 30 minutes to complete and couldn't wait to show Sophia once it was done. She always made a big deal out of my small accomplishments, and frankly, I enjoyed the praise. A bit of ego-stroking never hurt, even if it was over something relatively minor. Settling into my car, I hit the garage door opener and started the engine. The soft hum of the car greeted me as I placed my briefcase on the passenger seat and double-checked my essentials. Cell phone, calculator, notebook. Everything was in order. I reversed down the driveway, catching a glimpse of Sophia through the kitchen window as she washed dishes. She waved at me as I reached the street. Just as I was about to shift into drive and close the garage door with the remote, my cell phone rang, freezing me in place. I answered it quickly, glancing back up toward the window to wave one last time, but Sophia had already moved out of sight. The caller's voice greeted me cheerfully, informing me I'd been caught at the perfect moment. Tonight's meeting had been canceled. Jonathan, along with Lucas and Dylan, had been called away unexpectedly, and with key officers absent, there was no reason to meet. Unless I had an urgent issue, I could enjoy the night off. Relief flooded me as I realized I had an unexpected evening at home. I slowly reversed back into the garage, noticing that Sophia's face hadn't reappeared at the kitchen window. She later admitted she'd stayed in the kitchen, hoping to surprise me by hearing my return. If she'd been elsewhere in the house, she likely wouldn't have heard the garage door. Once inside the garage, I shut the door behind me and stayed seated in the car for a few minutes, savoring the chance to relax. Deciding to order pizza for dinner instead of cooking, I planned to spend the night finishing the baby monitor installation. The nursery setup was nearly complete. Only a few garage connections and final testing remained. The cosmetic touches to the nursery were minimal. The camera, discreetly mounted in a corner, had been in place for 10 days without Sophia noticing it, a testament to its subtle design. I figured I could address the finishing touches later. The idea of setting up sound monitors in every room had come from Sophia's offhand comment about how useful it would be to keep an ear on the baby while it napped. Inspired, I decided to wire the house accordingly and even included a visual monitor for the nursery. That idea sparked when I saw some equipment a friend was throwing away. The primary controls for the system were installed in our bedroom, but I added a secondary set in the garage where I spent a lot of my free time. This setup included speakers and an old television acting as the video monitor, giving me the flexibility to check on the nursery no matter where I was in the house. The project was almost done. Only a few adjustments were needed before I could surprise Sophia and relax for the evening. Eager to finish, I stepped out of the car and began fine-tuning the system. After about 20 minutes of work, I was satisfied that everything was functioning as planned. I moved on to testing the sound feeds, which could be adjusted individually or routed together to the 5 second-hand speakers I'd installed above my workstation. Testing began with the living room feed, and I was impressed by the sensitivity. The sound was so clear that I could even hear Sophia showering in the master bathroom. Confident in the setup, I switched all the feeds to live mode, routing them into the garage for one final test. The video monitor came next, and I got a bit absorbed in checking the wiring and controls. As I worked, a voice came through the living room speaker. It sounded like Sophia, so I turned up the volume out of curiosity. The sound quality was incredible. Every word was crystal clear. To my surprise, she seemed to be talking to someone on the phone, and the name Ethan caught my attention. I listened as Sophia said, "It'd be great if you could get here by 7 o'clock, her tone playful yet firm. My ears perked up at what followed. "It's on, lover," she said softly. Ethan's voice replied, "Okay, love. I'll see you then. Don't be late. We won't have much time as it is." Then, with a chuckle, he added, "And no, don't expect a repeat." Sophia's response was a giggle before she hung up. I froze, processing what I'd just heard. Who was Ethan? The only Ethan I knew was Ethan Clark, Emily's husband. Emily was Sophia's college roommate and still her closest friend. Ethan and I got along well enough. He was a sociable guy with a good sense of humor. Could this be about something planned for Emily? That seemed logical, but my gut told me something was off. Still, I pushed the thought aside and focused on finishing the monitor setup. The camera in the nursery connected without issue, and I leaned back in satisfaction. The monitor's display, however, didn't show the baby's crib. It captured the spare bedroom. The queen-size bed in there was neatly made, the sheets turned down like a hotel room, something I'd never seen Sophia do unless we had guests. I adjusted the camera settings to zoom in and out, testing its full range. At the widest angle, the entire room was visible, except for the corner where the camera was mounted near the ceiling. Content with the picture quality, I left the camera in its default position, showing the bed, door, closet, and window. Satisfied with my work, I tidied my tools and grabbed a beer from the old fridge in the garage. A fridge Sophia wouldn't allow inside the house, but worked perfectly here. I sank into my well-worn recliner, planning to order pizza and surprise Sophia with the finished monitor system. Just as I started relaxing, the doorbell rang. A moment later, I heard Sophia greet the visitor warmly. "You're late," she teased before inviting him in. "We've got until 10:30, she added, "so don't waste a second." Her tone shifted into something that made my blood run cold. A sultry, intimate cadence I recognized all too well. It was the voice Sophia only used when she wanted to seduce me. Sick with dread, I sat up as the front door closed. Sophia's voice continued, her tone low and teasing. "Judging by that bulge, I'm not the only one who had a hard time today. It looks really good," she purred. "Now come here and give me a proper hello." Ethan's voice responded, muffled but unmistakable, followed by the sounds of rustling and muted moans. Then Sophia's voice again. "Not here. Come back to our room. I've got it all set up for us." I gripped the armrests of my recliner, ball rising in my throat. Sophia was leading Ethan back to our bedroom. Confused and overwhelmed by what I had just witnessed, my first instinct was to storm into the kitchen, throw Ethan out of the house, and confront Sophia directly. But a part of me held back, questioning the reality of what I'd seen and heard. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I told myself it had to be a misunderstanding. Sophia and I were deeply in love, and I'd always believed she was as faithful as I was. While she occasionally teased me about admiring other women, it had always been lighthearted and harmless. I never felt the urge to stray, and our intimate life was fulfilling for both of us. Sophia had never seemed to want for anything, and I took pride in ensuring she was always satisfied. This couldn't be what it appeared to be. She was my best friend, my partner, and the mother of our unborn child. Still seated in my worn recliner, I glanced at the baby monitor and noticed movement on the screen. The door to the spare bedroom opened, and Sophia led Ethan inside. The bed had been carefully prepared, and she guided him to the side near the window. Standing in front of the closed closet doors, Sophia seemed to position herself intentionally, almost looking directly into the camera. She wore her threadbare weekend robe, the one that barely reached her mid-thigh, paired with high-heeled slippers I had given her for her birthday 2 months earlier. Her hair was styled elegantly in a bun, accentuating the graceful curve of her neck, and her makeup was just right, soft yet striking. Despite the rogue's shabby appearance, Sophia looked radiant, like a vision of poise and seduction. As she stood there, her hands slowly moved to the robe's neckline. With her left hand, she held it closed, while her right hand began to unsnap each button methodically. The robe loosened but stayed in place, teasing Ethan with glimpses of the lingerie beneath. Once the last button was undone, she brought both hands back to the neckline and slowly peeled the robe open. She paused briefly, letting Ethan, and unwittingly me, admire the sight before shrugging her shoulders, letting the robe fall to the floor in a soft heap. Beneath it, she wore the lingerie I had gifted her for Valentine's Day. She had modeled it for me once, but hadn't worn it again until now. With a slow, deliberate gesture, she beckoned Ethan to come closer. Ethan, visibly stunned, moved around the bed, stammering, "I was expecting to see you tonight, but you've made it so special." He paused, his face alight with awe. "God, you're beautiful," he added. The two began disrobing, and it was then that I snapped out of my dazed shock. If I was going to confront Sophia, I needed proof. Acting quickly, I retrieved a fresh SD card, inserted it into the recording device, and resumed watching the monitor. The scene unfolding before me was devastating. Ethan and Sophia embraced tightly, their actions becoming increasingly intimate. My stomach churned as I watched them move to the bed, engaging in an act I never imagined I'd see. It seemed to last forever, Ethan moving against her with fervor. After about 15 minutes, Sophia pushed him back gently and spoke softly, though I couldn't make out the words. I stood up and paced, my mind racing with conflicting emotions: anger, betrayal, heartbreak, and disbelief. Suddenly, her voice became clearer. "Ethan, unless you want David to walk in on us, you need to go now." Sophia gathered Ethan's clothes and handed them to him, then stripped the sheets from the bed and bundled them under her arm. She left the room before he had finished dressing, heading toward the laundry room between the kitchen and garage. When she returned to the living room, Ethan was waiting for her, looking smug. "That was amazing," he said, grinning. "We should talk about doing this again." Sophia's tone turned firm. "No, Ethan. I told you this was just the one time, only because of our deal." Ethan chuckled, clearly unfazed. "I get it, but if you ever think about it, you know where to find me." They exchanged one last kiss, sloppy and unhurried, before Ethan left. As the front door closed softly, I heard the lock click. I slumped back into the recliner, overwhelmed by despair. The spare bedroom, once intended for our child, now felt like a tainted space. Sophia reappeared briefly on the monitor, tidying the room meticulously to erase any sign of what had just transpired. She gathered her clothes and returned to our bedroom, where I soon heard her shower running. By the time she climbed into bed, I was still in the garage, too stunned to move. It was nearly 11 p.m. When I finally mustered the energy to enter the house, I passed the spare room. It was as though nothing had happened. The bed was stripped, and the space was eerily spotless. In our bedroom, Sophia lay quietly, feigning sleep. I prepared for bed, brushing my teeth and changing into pajamas. When I joined her, she rolled over and draped an arm across me. "How was your night?" she asked sleepily. After a long pause, I replied, "Traumatic. I'll tell you about it later." She didn't press further, rolling back over and pretending to fall asleep. Listening to her breathing, I couldn't tell if she was truly asleep or just pretending. Either way, I stared into the darkness, unable to rest. When morning came, I claimed to be sick and stayed home, waiting until Sophia left for work. I began my search through Sophia's dresser, starting with the bottom drawer. Beneath a pile of sweaters and tucked inside a paper bag, I found the lingerie Ethan had enjoyed the night before. Pulling it out, I noted with a sickened heart that the lap of the ruined underwear was still damp. My hands trembled as I held the garment. After calling my boss to report that I was unwell and wouldn't be coming in, I went back to the garage to review the recording from the previous night. Initially, I fast-forwarded through the footage, unable to endure a rehash of what I'd already witnessed. I needed to ensure the video's quality more than anything else. However, as I watched and rewound certain parts, I started to notice small, painful details I had missed in my initial shock. The morning passed with me scrutinizing every second of the footage. By the time I was done, I had made 2 duplicate recordings and placed 2 phone calls to people I trusted implicitly. Returning home later that day, I realized I hadn't eaten since lunch the day before. Missing dinner the night before had left me queasy about breakfast, and I continued to avoid food despite my growing hunger. Sophia arrived home at her usual time, around 4:30 p.m. When she leaned in to kiss me, I turned away. Her puzzled expression lingered, but she said nothing. By 5:30, I couldn't delay the confrontation any longer. Sitting with my thoughts was only causing me more distress. I decided to confront her under the guise of showing her the baby monitor project I had been working on. When I asked Sophia if she had a moment, she brushed me off, saying she was just about to start dinner. I picked up my phone and asked what she wanted for dinner. She suggested Chinese, and I ordered it for delivery without hesitation. Then I guided her into the bedroom to show her the monitor controls. The setup impressed her, as I'd hoped it would. I demonstrated how she could watch and listen from various rooms, using the garage as a secondary monitoring station. She seemed pleased, smiling as she tested the system. Then I switched on the video feed and directed her attention to the monitor. "I've been working on this for a while," I said, stepping into the spare room for a demonstration. Mimicking her actions from the night before, I struck a mocking pose, then returned to the bedroom. "David, this is amazing," she exclaimed. "When did you finish this?" "This afternoon," I lied. She furrowed her brow, clearly trying to recall when I'd had the time to complete the work. Her smile faded slightly as she struggled to piece things together. "There's one more thing I want to show you," I said, taking her hand and leading her to the garage. I explained the necessity of the garage station, citing the time I spent there and the need to monitor the baby when she wasn't home. Then, I inserted a USB drive into the TV. "Watch the screen," I instructed. At first, the monitor displayed the same view of the spare bedroom as before, empty, with the bed unmade. But when I pressed a button on the remote, the footage shifted. Now it showed Sophia kneeling in front of Ethan. I glanced at her face. The color drained from it, and she seemed to sway before catching herself on the edge of the workbench. Tears welled in her eyes as I fast-forwarded briefly and then hit play. The next scene was unmistakable. Ethan was grabbing at her lingerie, and Sophia's face twisted in pain as he pushed into her roughly. I paused the video, turning to her. "Do you want to see more?" I asked coldly. Sophia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Her expression was a mixture of shame and desperation. I gestured toward the kitchen. "Let's talk." Sophia followed me silently, and I seated her at the table. Taking a chair next to her, I finally broke the silence. "Explain this to me," she stammered, mumbling through her tears. "David, I can explain. It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I shot back, incredulous. "You were with Ethan in our home, in the room we were preparing for our baby. What am I supposed to think?" Sophia hesitated, then began her story. She explained that back in college, she and Ethan had dated briefly. Ethan, known for being a playboy, had started dating Emily as well. At one point, he was seeing both of them. One night, after drinking too much, Ethan had cornered Sophia. Their conversation turned flirtatious, and Sophia admitted she wasn't comfortable being intimate without birth control. Ethan had demanded a promise that if she ever got to a point where pregnancy wasn't a risk, she'd spend a night with him. To her shock, Ethan had kept the note as a joke over the years. Sophia admitted she had forgotten about it until 2 weeks ago, when we announced her pregnancy to Ethan and Emily. While I was out of the room, Emily had brought up the note, laughing about how it was time to make good on it. Ethan, bolstered by alcohol and Emily's encouragement, pressed Sophia. Feeling trapped and not wanting to start a fight, She agreed to the arrangement. When she finished, I stared at her in disbelief. 6 years ago? I asked. And you thought this was worth honoring now? What about me? What about our family? Sophia dissolved into tears, swearing it was a one-time mistake. She fell to her knees, pleading, David, I love you. It was stupid and wrong, but I felt obligated. Please believe me. It won't happen again. I looked down at her, my heart breaking. This was the woman I had trusted, the mother of my child. But now, I wasn't sure if I even recognized her anymore. Sophia explained that the promise she had made to Ethan wasn't about desire or infidelity, but about honoring a commitment she had believed was right at the time. She insisted it was rooted in a friendship that had once been very dear to her. After hearing her explanation, I took a moment to process before responding. You could have said no, I pointed out. You sobered up, thought about it, and still believed it was something you owed him. Ethan, this man your friend became over these years. Is that correct? Sophia nodded hesitantly. I pressed further. Was this something you were actually looking forward to, Sophia? Her reaction was swift and emotional. No, David, I wasn't looking forward to it. I felt obligated, like it was something I had to do, not something I wanted to do. But her voice softened, and she looked down at the table. Then, almost in a whisper, she admitted, Okay, yes, David. I guess in a way I was looking forward to it, but not like you think. Her words hit me like a blow, but I stayed calm. She continued, speaking haltingly. I never thought about cheating on you, never wanted to. But when this situation came up, I felt like I had no choice. If I had to go through with it, I told myself there was no reason not to try to enjoy it. I tried to convince myself it wasn't about you or us. It was about keeping a promise I made years ago. I never felt like I needed to do this, because you weren't enough for me, David. You've always been enough. Her rationalization was heartbreaking. She had justified betraying me to make it special, believing it was a one-time thing that would never happen again. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself. Do you remember about 6 weeks ago, Sophia? I began. I called you on my way back from that conference. We were teasing on the phone, and I suggested we meet at the Holiday Inn in Atherton. I wanted us to have a weekend away from home, to have fun. Do you remember? Sophia nodded. Of course, David. It was a great weekend, she said, her voice tremulous but genuine. I pressed on. And you wanted it to be a special weekend for us, for me, right? Her voice became firmer, more certain. Of course I did. It was special, I continued. Do you remember what you packed for that weekend? Sophia smiled faintly, reminiscing. I packed a nice dress in case we went dancing, which we did, and some comfortable clothes for walking around. I paused before revealing my point. Hold on a moment, Sophia. I need to show you something to help you understand where this is going. I stood and walked toward the bedroom, glancing back to ensure she was following. She hesitated but trailed behind me. I powered up the bedroom TV, loaded the video, and pressed play. The footage showed Sophia kneeling before Ethan, then rising and turning toward the bed, facing the camera. I looked at her as the scene unfolded. What were you wearing in this? I asked, keeping my voice even. Blushing deeply, Sophia murmured, The white lingerie you gave me for Valentine's Day. I'd never worn it before, except to show you when you gave it to me. And why didn't you wear it during our weekend at the Holiday Inn? I pressed. Sophia faltered, then admitted, I didn't think it was the right time. I wore a peasant skirt and a white blouse, and to bed, just my Donald Duck t-shirt. I let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking again. So the weekend you said was special for us wasn't special enough for you to wear something you knew I'd love. But you wore it for Ethan, for a man I thought was my best friend. Explain that to me, Sophia. Explain how you thought this man deserved something I never even got to see again after Valentine's Day. Her shoulders slumped, and she couldn't meet my gaze. I pressed on, my voice heavy with pain. Do you know why this hurts so much, Sophia? If I didn't love you, we wouldn't be living in this house together. If I didn't think you were someone extraordinary, I wouldn't have married you. And yet, last night, one of the worst nights of my life, you destroyed that trust. Ethan, a man I considered one of my closest friends, came to our home. You welcomed him, led him into a room that was supposed to be our child's nursery, and betrayed me. Sophia's lips trembled as tears rolled down her cheeks. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. I watched her struggle with the enormity of what had happened, but it was unclear whether her tears were from guilt, regret, or something else entirely. I didn't stop. And don't tell me this was just about keeping a promise, Sophia. Promises made in drunken college nights don't justify what happened last night. You made vows to me, to be faithful and true. Were those less important than a 6-year-old joke Ethan never should have taken seriously? Sophia broke into sobs, burying her face in her hands. I felt like my heart was breaking all over again. Sophia had clearly gone to great lengths to prepare for her tryst with Ethan. She had dressed herself in lingerie she hadn't worn for me in over a year, styled her hair, and applied makeup in a way she hadn't done for me since. As the saying goes, Hector was a pup. When I questioned her about this effort, she insisted that the meeting wasn't important to her. David, she said tearfully, it wasn't like that. I wasn't thinking of it as special. I just felt I had to do it. Her explanation felt hollow. She had gone out of her way to make herself look incredible, preparing in ways that suggested this encounter was more than casual. I pointed out how she had treated her time with Ethan as an event worthy of meticulous preparation, while time with me, her husband, was treated as ordinary, routine, and far less significant. Worse, she had done things with Ethan that she had refused to do for me, her supposed partner in everything. Sophia's tears began to flow freely as she blinked them away, insisting it wasn't what it seemed. She tried to reassure me of her love, emphasizing how much I meant to her. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my voice calm but heavy with emotion. I'm not sure what's going to happen next, Sophia, I admitted. But one thing I do know is that this can't stay between us. I'm calling Ethan and Emily. They need to come over tonight, and we're going to talk about this. Sophia's face paled as she realized I was serious. David, please, she began, but I held up my hand, silencing her. I dialed their number, and Emily answered. I requested that she and Ethan come by for a quick conversation. Emily sounded confused but agreed. While I was on the phone, Sophia quietly handled the Chinese food delivery. Despite having no appetite, I forced myself to eat, knowing I'd need the energy for what promised to be an emotionally draining night. Sophia barely touched her food, idly pushing it around her plate, and for a fleeting moment, I almost believed her reassurances that it was a one-time mistake and that she still loved me. At 7:15, the doorbell rang. Before opening the door, I turned to Sophia and said quietly, I suspect there's more to this than even you realize. I greeted Ethan and Emily at the door. Both smiled politely, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they shared a subtle, knowing look with Sophia. Ethan's gaze toward her felt possessive, and I noticed Sophia cringe slightly under it. Once everyone was seated in the living room, I gestured for Sophia to join them on the couch. She hesitated and instead chose her recliner off to the side. I began making small talk, touching on mundane topics and briefly mentioning the new monitoring system I'd been working on, without revealing its true purpose or the events of the previous night. Emily and Ethan exchanged puzzled looks, clearly unsure why they'd been summoned. Eventually, I decided to break the tension by offering drinks. Everyone accepted. Emily chose white wine. Ethan opted for Jack Daniels with a splash of 7-Up. Sophia had orange juice due to her pregnancy, and I poured myself what looked like a gin and tonic, but was pure tonic water. Taking a seat on a hassock near the TV, I surveyed the group. I turned to Emily first. Emily, I said, keeping my tone measured, can you explain your motivation for setting this whole thing up? Her brow furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about, David? She asked. I clarified, I'm asking why you worked so hard to arrange everything. Last night, Sophia, Ethan, the note, all of it. Before Emily could respond, Ethan choked on his drink, sputtering and going pale. I shifted my attention to him. I understand what you gained from it, I said evenly. But I have to wonder, was there more to this than just the obvious? Ethan stammered, trying to compose himself. Meanwhile, Emily crossed her legs, her foot bouncing nervously as she watched me. A small, almost playful smile played on her lips. What do you think it all means, David? Emily asked, her tone laced with a mix of curiosity and mischief. I replied bluntly, I think it means you and Ethan are exactly who people think you are. You have reputations. Reputations for being manipulative, selfish, and willing to exploit others for your own amusement or gain. What I don't understand is why you'd bring Sophia into it. Emily leaned back, clearly enjoying the attention. Ethan, however, looked increasingly uncomfortable, his gaze darting between me and Sophia. You've been very direct about who you are with us in the past, I continued, addressing both Emily and Ethan. But last night, you crossed the line. After hearing some rumors at the Cowas meeting, I shared with everyone in the room that I was relieved nothing had been said to Sophia or me directly, at least not yet. However, I anticipated that was about to change. Emily, with her usual smoothness, admitted it wasn't the ideal time or way to address the matter, but she agreed it was necessary. I glanced at Sophia. Up until that moment, I had assumed she was aware of everything happening behind the scenes, but now I wasn't so sure. Emily explained the premise of their group, known as a Key Club. She and Ethan had been members for a couple of years. The group met on Friday nights at a restaurant called Barney's Broiler, where couples gathered in a private room for dinner. Each couple brought a house key with their address engraved on it. These keys were dropped into a barrel, like the ones used for bingo games. After dinner, the wives returned home to prepare for private time with a partner other than their spouse. Meanwhile, the husbands drew keys from the barrel. If a man drew his own key, he'd set it aside and draw again, but only once more. If he drew his own key a second time, he was out for the night. Once everyone had a key, the men had drinks before heading off for a weekend rendezvous with their new partners. The arrangement wasn't for just a few hours, it spanned the entire weekend. Emily explained how this added spice to their marriages, keeping things fresh and avoiding boredom. As Emily described this, I noticed Sophia's expression shift from shock to confusion, clearly trying to process what she was hearing. Emily then casually revealed that other members of the club had assumed Sophia and I were involved in swapping with her and Ethan on the side. She even mentioned that many of the men were particularly interested in Sophia. The room fell silent as I finished relaying these details. Sophia sat frozen, her mouth agape. Emily, on the other hand, wore a smug, simpering smile, while Ethan appeared relaxed and self-satisfied. I broke the silence. Sophia, I said, there's something you should know about your partner from last night. Sophia's face paled as I turned to Ethan, my voice steady but cold. Ethan, you're quite the prize, aren't you? The wives in your little game seem to think so, always eager to see if they've drawn the highly regarded partner for the weekend. Ethan's grin widened, but Sophia looked sick. She shrank into her chair, avoiding my gaze. Emily watched the interaction with detached amusement, her foot bouncing nervously. After taking a slow drink of my tonic water, I let the tension build further. Finally, Emily spoke, defending the arrangement. She described it as a good deal that brought couples closer, adding excitement and new ideas for the bedroom. Ethan simply grinned as she spoke. Emily assured us there was no pressure, urging us to consider joining. It's just something to think about, she said lightly. We'll always be here if you change your minds. I responded firmly, my tone unyielding. Emily, thank you for your patience, but I haven't discussed this with Sophia, nor do I intend to. We're not interested in swapping or seeking other partners to fix something that isn't broken. Sophia and I are intelligent, imaginative, and perfectly capable of keeping our relationship strong without unconventional methods. I let my voice harden as I addressed a more serious concern. Ethan, I said sharply, your reputation precedes you, and I'm particularly troubled by the fact that you don't practice safe intimacy. My wife, who is carrying our child, will need to see a doctor immediately for testing. Until I know she's clear, there will be no closeness between us. The risks you've introduced into my home are unforgivable. Sophia's head dropped as she buried her face in her hands. Ethan's smug grin faltered, and Emily's playful demeanor turned cold. Looking at them both, I expressed my disappointment and sense of betrayal. You've crossed the line, I said. I don't know which of you I'm angrier with, but one thing is certain, We won't be seeing you again for the foreseeable future. I powered off the TV, ejected the USB drive, and handed it to Sophia. Without hesitation, she crumpled several sheets of newspaper, lit them in the fireplace, and added the drive to the flames. Together, we watched as the fire consumed the evidence. Turning back to Ethan and Emily, I noted their growing discomfort. Within minutes, they were unconscious. 3 hours later, at 11 p.m., the doorbell rang. I greeted Lopez and gestured toward the two limp bodies on the floor. "The package is ready," I said coldly. Lopez nodded, asking if I had anything else for him. I gestured toward Ethan and Emily. Lopez returned with 7 men, who lifted Emily and then Ethan. Before they took Ethan away, I halted them. Retrieving a baseball bat from upstairs, I made my intentions clear. "I need a few swings." Lopez nodded, and Ethan was placed on the floor. I targeted specific points, his kneecaps, ankles, and groin, delivering swift, precise blows. Sophia watched in stunned silence, her face pale and her hands trembling. As Lopez's men carried Ethan and Emily away, I turned to Sophia. She asked quietly, "What will happen to them?" "They're going to Mexico to help medical students practice," I replied flatly. "If anyone comes looking, Lopez will handle it." Sophia stood frozen as I made it clear that our physical relationship was over. "Tomorrow, we'll conduct a DNA test. If the child is mine, I'll support the birth but not the marriage. You'll get the house and financial support until you find a job. But if you take another lover before our child turns 10, I'll ensure you're made useful." Sophia nodded numbly, her eyes wide with shock. The next morning, we filed for divorce. Weeks later, the DNA test confirmed I was the father. Months after that, our son was born. While I devoted myself to him, I could never rekindle love for Sophia. She adhered to our agreement, and I supported her financially for years. Lopez later thanked me for the arrangement with a significant gift. No one ever came looking for Ethan or Emily.